talk about robotic process automation today and what top companies are doing. And for those that may not be too familiar with RPA, it's about using automation systems, software to, streamline tasks and processes. Usually they're repetitive and tedious type processes. And generally companies, tend to get high return on investment from these types of technologies. And it's one of the fastest growing parts of the enterprise software world today on a global basis. So I'm the author of Artificial Intelligence Basics, the RPA handbook, and I do write for Forbes.com, where I cover AI and RPA, and you can find me here at Twitter. So let me go to, oops. Let me go to the next slide here. And so I do talk to quite a few companies. Not sure why the slides are not working too well today. But I do work with, do talk to a lot of companies like Intuit and Voya and so forth. So my presentation will include some of the findings and learnings that I've had with some of these companies. Besides RPA being a fast-growing industry, 63% in 2019 to 1.3 billion, and besides the high ROI, which is always great for any software system, RPA can be a great career move. It's one of the highest growth areas for jobs, and you don't necessarily have to be a technical person per se to develop bots. You just go through the different academies that the vendors provide, such as UiPath, Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism, and so forth. Let's see. Not sure why the slides are a little flaky here, but so why for what types of processes might you use RPA? It's a lot of different things that you can do with them. They're also getting more advanced too. In the early days, it was really about back office, about ERP entry, processing invoices, but it's now going to the point of handling social media or handling customer interactions, some really mission critical type things in terms of dealing with your customers or your partners, where RPA is starting to make a difference. So just like with anything, when it comes to software, and this software is not cheap, and it does take time to implement, you do have to have a plan in place. It's something you just don't want to rush into, and you have to, have a brainstorming session. I suggest having a workshop or something, be as inclusive as possible, people from different departments at different levels from these departments, and have, say, an introductory look at RPA so they understand what RPA is, what the benefits are, and be honest about, some of the issues and risks. And then at this workshop, go over questions and be as free-flowing as possible. How much automation is in your department? What has worked when it comes to automation? What processes can be improved? How many people are involved in these different processes? Try to get a sense of, what the status is of your IT assets, how you've worked with those IT assets in the past, and look at the processes, whether it be IT-driven processes or just any other process that are people-driven. So this is a good way to get off to a good start when it comes to putting together a plan. I do recommend getting a consulting firm. It doesn't have to be a long-term engagement. It doesn't have to be very intensive. In fact, and even companies like Intuit, who I've talked to, have mentioned that they brought in a consulting firm. And I mean, this is a very sophisticated technology company, and they wanted to get a consulting firm. Now, it was only for 6 months. It doesn't have to be long term, but the consulting firm can definitely help because they've seen different types of implementations. They can provide some, expertise that you may not have. This is still a kind of a new area for a lot of companies. They can help evaluate the different platforms, the different, and look at, the KPIs to put into place and how to take RPA to the next level. This is a journey. We're starting to see companies use AI and really sophisticated functions when it comes to RPA. So education, I mentioned some education with the workshop, but the education doesn't stop. It's ongoing. It can be seminars, it can be blogs, it can be videos. These are just really helpful because to be successful with RPA, there really does have to be some change management in the organization. There has to be, a sense that this is a high priority. It's something that is getting lots of resources, and people do want to understand what this is and how it's going to impact them. I also think there's going to be fear, and whenever there's change, especially when it comes to automation, it's a word that scares off employees. So education is a great way to help deal with some of the fears. So how long does the plan have to be? It doesn't have to be very long at all. It could be just a few pages. Speaking of Intuit again, they actually showed me their plan. It wasn't a written plan per se. It was a PowerPoint. And some of the things that some of the elements that you would put into this plan would be, the high level objectives. We want to, maybe reduce the full-time equivalent time worked on certain processes, so more of efficiency. Cycle and turnaround times are another major KPI when it comes to RPA, or reducing the number of errors. This is very important too. Can be very important for invoices, for example. The errors are a very common thing when it comes to invoices, and a few errors can really add up in terms of costs. So that's another KPI. Set up realistic timelines and deliverables. It always takes longer than you think it will. So be realistic on that front. Establish some type of goal on the ROI. And what's amazing about RPA is the ROI tends to be extremely high. Hundreds of percents. Multiples. And that's why I think it's one of the fastest growing parts of the software market today, is because that ROI is so strong. And then finally, make sure people know what they're supposed to do, their roles and responsibilities when it comes to the RPA implementation. Process methodologies. These have been around for a long time. They go back to Toyota when the company back in the 50s was trying to put in place processes to improve the manufacturing of automobiles. You'll hear things like Lean or Six Sigma or Lean Six Sigma. And, these are frameworks that look at how to reduce it. It's usually in the framework of, usually in the context of a manufacturing type setting. So it was a lot about defects, lowering the defects. But over the years, Lean and Six Sigma have been widely applied to non-manufacturing processes, about just automating pretty much anything, and they are good. They're a good way to first get a sense of what your processes are, and then look at how those processes can be improved. So a lot of consultants will come in first on an RPA basis, and this was what happened with Voya. They spent several years just putting in continuous lean improvement before they even looked at RPA. So that might be something to consider, just to put in place some more traditional types of process methodologies to get the organization on the right track, so the RPA system can be even more powerful and effective. Okay, so again, Lean Six Sigma, they can get a little confusing. You got the black belts and so forth, it's about bringing in some consultants, and they will help you out with this. But you don't have to be, too strict with it, and you can kind of pick and choose the different elements for each of the different types of process methodologies. Okay. Bots, just as a just for those who may not know it, a bot is a way. It's software that you create that is automated and will do a certain process. It will handle a certain process in an automated fashion. And that's one of the main features of an RPA system. And because Lean Six Sigma and these methodologies are about, automating tasks and processes, that there's such a close association between the two. So having that bit of that little background in these process methodologies can go a long way in helping you putting together a good bot. Implementation. When you're evaluating a vendor, there's at least 70 plus RPA vendors on the market, and more are popping up just because it is such a fast growing category of software. So it's not easy to figure out which is the best software for you. But I do have some criteria to think about. One is, third-party validation. The consultant can help out with this too, because they have experience with different vendors. But there are software sites out there that review sites that evaluate this, or Gartner, IDC as well. You want minimum capabilities. You want to make sure they create bots. You want to make sure there's also a orchestration system, so a way to manage these bots. One of the biggest problems with RPA is the management of these. You get so many different bots, they can be very difficult to manage and so forth. Funding. I would prefer to see a company that has significant funding from major backers and venture capitalists or strategic investors, because it's a validation. They've done a lot of due diligence, they have money on the line, and also a company will have the resources to invest in customer support, invest in the R&D. Ecosystem. I would prefer to see a RPA vendor that has its own third-party apps that you can implement, because RPA can't do everything. And take a look at their app store, and do they have the apps that you need? And are there a lot of apps on the store, which means that there is a vibrant ecosystem. Cost is obviously a big consideration. Again, RPA can be expensive. A lot of times you're paying per bot. You're paying a license for the orchestration system. Now, given that the ROI is high, it's not as big a factor. But hey, might as well negotiate. And I think you can negotiate with these vendors, because it is a competitive market when it comes to hiring one of these companies. Training and education. Do they have an academy? Do they have a way for your team to learn and to improve themselves and how to create bots, how to manage these bots, and so forth? And just industry expertise. Are they thought leaders in the industry? Do you see them quoted and so forth, or on Twitter? Are they active on Twitter? Okay, going into production. I think when it comes to enterprise software, you get excited, you put a lot of money on the line, you got resources, and you you want to go shoot for the moon, you want to do the moon shot, but that's usually the wrong approach from the start. Look at the narrow use cases, the edge cases, and then most importantly, kind of the low-hanging fruit. Like a lot of times it's invoices, it's in the back office, it's kind of the boring type processes. But if you can automate them, it just frees up more time for your employees and your team to do value-added things. Also, once you create the bot, make sure you understand the orchestration system and have those KPIs, new KPIs in place for tracking the performance of these bots. Bots can degrade or they can break. When a process changes, what can happen easily is the bot just blows up. And it can result in some big problems. That's why, again, start on a narrow use case, and also a use case that's repetitive and doesn't change much. This will, at least in the early days, help you with the breakage problem. And as you get more comfortable with RPA, you can then expand beyond that and get a little bit more sophisticated and take on processes that may have more change. But by that time, you should be able to handle it. So monitoring, again, I mentioned is that these bots do break, and we do need an orchestration system in place. but have periodic reviews, and also a COE is something to think about as well. Center of Excellence, and this is a group of people. It doesn't have to be a big group of people. I think Intuit says like 3 or 4 people in it, and it's their role to monitor the RPA system to make sure everything is going on track. That when there's something added to it, it's done according to certain principles and KPIs and so forth. So a COE is usually a pretty good idea, even for smaller implementations. And again, it doesn't have to be a big group of people. In fact, probably a smaller group of people is better, be a little bit more agile and more responsive in terms of actions. Another thing when it comes to RPA and actually gets not enough attention, but can really be a problem is security. You are dealing with sensitive personal, you could be, invoices, you're dealing with personal information, financial information. If you have certain processes that handle customer accounts, you want to make sure that data is protected. So when you put that data and you have a bot in place handling that data, have security. Now, RPA systems do have security, and it varies. The bigger players usually have top-notch enterprise-grade security. So if you're looking at a smaller vendor, make sure they also have enterprise-grade security. And you can't just rely solely on the RPA security system itself. It's a good idea to bring in IT to make sure they know what's going on, and then they can integrate their own security approaches and systems with the RPA system to make sure things don't go off the rails. So that's what here we got. And also make sure you bring in IT when it comes to, HR when it comes to these different security measures. And as for the future of RPA, I'll just end we only have a few minutes here on the future of RPA, but one is we're going to probably see more consolidation in the industry. We're seeing bigger players move aggressively into RPA. Microsoft is perhaps the biggest example of this. The company has done a tremendous job. They recently acquired a company in the RPA space. So we're going to see much more from the bigger players like Microsoft. I think we're going to see more from Oracle and Google, perhaps even Amazon. They can't ignore this market because it is so big. RPA is definitely going to get much more on the radar screen. It's going to get a lot of validation because of this. The other thing that we're going to see is AI, artificial intelligence. Now, there is some confusion out there about RPA. The confusion is some people think RPA is AI or segment of AI or subset of AI. It isn't. Traditional RPA is really just typical software that goes and integrates your IT systems, and that's about it. What's going on is the RPA vendors are adding AI features, so it can look in and for example, interpret, an invoice. It can use, some recognition systems to get a sense of what kind of invoice this is or what should be done with that invoice. So it's kind of like RPA plus. It's the next generation of RPA. That's not what generally people would consider RPA today, but the future is definitely on going to AI. And you also hear something called process mining. It's not big here so much in the US where I'm based, but it's growing. It will be. I think in the next few years it will be. It's more prevalent right now in Europe. Its roots go back into Denmark in the academic community, and is from there grown into the open source community. But process mining uses machine learning to analyze your current processes and find the bottlenecks, suggest optimizations, and so forth. And so it's a great complement to RPA. And so a company like UiPath has bought a company in process mining. I know Microsoft has talked a lot about process mining as being part of their roadmap. So it's a way to try to automate that part of the bot process to make it so it's just a lot quicker and more efficient to create the bots, and also to understand what your processes are. Because I mean, you can bring in some top consultants to come and look at your processes, and your own company can look at them. A lot of times, it's easy to miss some important things. So that's another part of the roadmap that I see with RPA. And so I think, but I think again, the most important thing right now is to understand that RPA is here to stay. It's fast growing. Right now, it tends to be larger companies that are focused on it. That will start to change, especially from companies like Microsoft. Microsoft is really gunning for mid-size and small markets. So RPA is going to be, in the next few years, I mean, it's going to grow like crazy. So if your organization is looking to automate and improve their processes, RPA really should be at the top of the list.